Welcome back to Business Ethics. My name's Tom, and today we are going to talk a little bit about managing an ethics program. So, we've already talked about what an ethics program is, what are the components of it. And so, there's a question about, once you have some of those components in place, what do you do with it? How do you continue to run it, or how do you continue to implement mm, social norms or kind of shape the culture of your organization. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff in this chapter. And this is why we do the active reading assignments, so you can kind of get familiar with all the different components that they go over. A lot of it is kind of practical stuff. What does it look like for a corporation to undergo an ethics audit or a social audit, and how do they kind of how does this fit into the corporate structure and things like this. So I'm going to just hit on a couple of major kind of distinctions to be aware of, and so the first distinction here is talk about an ethics audit, and then they also talk about a social audit, right? These are slightly different. When it comes to, I mean, both of them are evaluations of an organization's program, ethical program, ethical performance, right? Um, but they have slightly different tacks, right? So an ethics audit typically refers to the evaluation of an organization's ethics program or ethical performance, and it's really kind of focused more on ethical infractions, you might say, something like this, right? So, to what extent do we have lots of complaints about things, fraud? To what extent do we have sexual harassment in the workplace? To what extent do we have, any kind of corporate espionage going on? Or to what extent do we have a lot of lawsuits going on? These kinds of things. And, you can do an audit in different ways. You can do an external audit where you get a consulting agency to come in and kind of do this work for you. You can do an internal audit where you have, who your ethics officers already are, or your HR department or something like this, kind of go through the numbers and get a sense of like where you're really at. Like, you can also look at the components of your ethics program, right? So to what extent does our training have ethical components? Are they pronounced? How much time and how often do employees go through some kind of ethics training? um, you might also have components of like legal compliance in here, right? So that's all part of kind of broad view of what an ethics audit kind of looks like. But a social audit is a little bit different in the sense that it has a broader kind of social responsibility angle to it, right? So in my notes, I put it's an evaluation of an organization's performance with all stakeholders, right? And that's financial stakeholders, philanthropic stakeholders, stakeholders with respect to the environment, the community, your legal department, and it might also bring in your financial performance as well, right? And kind of looks at it in more of a holistic sense. And again, you can look at a lot of the same kind of things, right? So, how are we dealing with employees that are let go? What's our severance package like? Um, are we growing at a consistent rate? Are we downsizing in the right sorts of ways? How is the community's reception of us? And so you might take some different data when you're doing a social audit, right? It's typically broader in scope, right? And so, one way to think about this is, the ethics audit is a little bit more narrow in scope, and a lot of things that are in a social audit would not be considered in an ethics audit, right? Now, I also kind of connect this in my notes to like a compliance culture or to a value based culture, right? So a compliance culture is likely to do something like an ethics audit, not necessarily, but likely, right? They're going to be looking for things that are wrong. Remember, a compliance culture is really focused on compliance, rule following, this kind of thing. And so they're going to want to look for what's wrong and think about ways to change that. Um, and whereas, a value driven company might be more apt to do something like a social audit where they're going to kind of look at a bunch of different factors in terms of like whatever their standard of success is in terms of promoting those values in the company and making those values kind of shown in the community or in the media or whatnot. So, social audit kind of goes hand in hand with the social responsibility framework, right? So, um, now, I mentioned a couple of things. So, these are different kinds of models for measuring performance in a company. I mentioned they're in the book, Six Sigma, Balanced Scorecard, Triple Bottom Line. And I kind of focus on these because for two reasons. One is that these give a good or a very concrete sense of what it would be like to have a different measure of success than just the bottom line. We've talked a little bit about like what it is to be a successful company when it comes to the original debate of this course, right? The profit first view versus a purpose first view of business. And so, if you're a profit first, if you have that view of business, then your measure of success is pretty clear, right? It's your bottom line. How much capital are you producing, right? Um, how much profit are you making? And that's really that's it. But when it comes to purpose first view of business, you might think this is appealing, but what is the sense of success for business like that? And so these give a little bit of a sense of what that standard or measure is. But also these are things that are kind of hot topics in the contemporary business world. If you go on LinkedIn or something, you'll see people that have like Six Sigma. I think they have like green belts and black belts and whatever. They have different measures and to what extent you've been trained on that. And balanced scorecard and triple bottom line. These things are the kinds of things that analysts get trained on and that businesses are kind of looking for. So it's good for students that are interested in starting their own business or getting into the business world to be aware of these things. I also mentioned in my notes, I give a link to Lean Up change management system, which is another hot topic. This idea of lean um, uh, organizations or making your organization more lean is something that really extends to a lot of the business world now because it has to do with getting rid of a lot of administrative weight, right? A lot of bureaucratic hoop jumping that we kind of tend to complain about when it comes to the government or whatnot. But when you're running a business, that ends up costing you a lot of money. It makes things run slower. You're paying more people to do less work. And if people aren't talking to each other and you're not kind of streamlining your operations, that can really be detrimental to your business. So this idea of lean up or whatnot is a popular kind of training. So, but when it comes to something like, let me give one example. When it comes to something like triple bottom line, right? Rather than having a bottom line that's just a financial bottom line, the triple bottom line is that your bottom line includes social and environmental factors in addition to your financial. So when you want to look at when you're measuring, where you're at as a business, you look at you weigh all three of these components: the social, the financial, and the environmental. And so if your environmental impact is not very good, but your financial impact is really good, you're making a lot of profit, and your social impact is kind of dwindling because your environmental impact is not that good, then you're going to take all those things into consideration, and you're going to try to balance that out a little bit so that your impact is kind of good on all fronts, right? And I think in balanced scorecard is similar in that it includes social aspects in addition to financial aspects, right? And so anyways, so these are ways in which companies start to have a different standard of success, right? And then the last thing I'll mention in this video is the factors that they talk about in implementing an ethics program. So, um, they talk about having shared values, right? So, this speaks to the idea of like a culture, um, uh, you know, um, to what extent, people are on the same page about what they value, what they want to do, especially if you're like a purpose driven kind of business. You want to make sure that people are on the same page when it comes to this. And this might be something that you're going to evaluate if you have an ethics program, or if you're doing some kind of social audit, to what you might have a questionnaire or something like this to kind of gauge where people really are at, to what extent they feel they're part of the company, they have a say in what's going on, and to what extent they would, make the same kind of decisions that other people in other departments might make, or they make think the same way that the higher ups are thinking, or whatnot. Another factor they talk about is input controls, right? This is definitely an area that you're going to look at in any kind of audit, right? Your hiring process. What does your onboarding look like? Um, and what kind of ethical infrastructure do you have in terms of, do people have a place to report internally about things that they grievances they might have, or it might even be in a positive sense. To what extent are you doing like promotions and these kinds of things? But the hiring and the onboarding process is a big one. When someone comes to your company, you decide to hire them, what are you doing to get them on the same page as you? What kind of training? What does your process look like? What is the outcome of that process? um, and then they talk about process controls in the book, and this is again continuing that, right? What are how do you, if you do have a good onboarding process, then how do you keep that going? Do you have regular trainings? Do you have regular kind of questionnaires? Do you keep in contact with your employees? Is there good communication? What does middle management look like in this process? Are they kind of regularly staying in touch with employees? Are the kind of you know are the values that are stated in your um, code of conduct the same values that you see actually in the office when people are interacting with each other, these kinds of things? And then output controls, you know um, measure the output of all those other processes, right? When you do, and so output controls here would be like an ethics audit or a social audit, where you're trying to measure really where you're at, um, and to what extent you people are really following through with all these things, and whether you're kind of getting the results that you want to get. Um, so, so that's just a kind of a brief overview of some points from this chapter, and that is it for this unit. I will be talking with you soon.